What happens when one of television's most unflinching interviewers locks horns with one of the most polarizing figures in modern royal history? The answer unfolded under the blistering studio lights of London, in front of millions of viewers, as Piers Morgan sat across from Meghan Markle in a conversation that would begin with civility but spiral into chaos. The evening had started as carefully as any broadcast could be. The studio audience filed in, buzzing with anticipation. The producers had spent hours rehearsing camera angles and sound checks, preparing for a segment that promised ratings gold. Meghan Markle, dressed in a crisp white blouse beneath a sharp black blazer, entered from stage left with calculated grace. The Duchess turned independent, celebrity carried herself as though the outcome of the interview was already decided in her favor. Her smile was polite, but her eyes glittered with a cool defiance. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back," Piers Morgan said smoothly, adjusting his tie. His trademark smile was in place, but his tone carried an undercurrent of steel. "Tonight, we're joined by Meghan Markle, here to share her story in her own words." Applause erupted. Meghan offered a delicate wave, then sat opposite Piers with the composure of a seasoned actress. "Thank you for being here," Piers began, his words deliberate. "Of course," Meghan replied, crossing her legs elegantly. "I'm happy to clarify a few things. People are always so confused about me." The audience chuckled nervously. Already her tone carried a faint edge, a subtle warning that this would not be an ordinary interview. Piers wasted no time. "Let's begin with the obvious. Your departure from the royal family. Do you regret leaving, or do you feel it was inevitable?" Meghan tilted her head, lips curving into a knowing smile. "If you'd been paying attention, you'd know I left because I had better things to do with my life than play dress up for tabloids." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some laughed uncomfortably, others leaned forward in disbelief. "So, you feel the monarchy was simply a spectacle, not a duty?" Piers pressed. Meghan shrugged. "I think waving from balconies and pretending to enjoy endless ceremonies isn't exactly meaningful work." The tension was instantaneous. Piers scribbled a note, but his eyes never left hers. "And yet, the monarchy has survived for centuries. People seem to believe it's more than theatrics. Do you think those who remain, like William and Kate, are wasting their lives?" "Not my problem," Meghan said curtly, adjusting her cuff. "If they enjoy irrelevance, good for them." A louder murmur spread across the audience. Meghan's words had crossed a line, and the energy in the room shifted. Piers leaned back, letting the silence hang. "And yet, Meghan, you benefited from that same irrelevance when you married into it. Do you feel you owe it any respect?" Meghan's laugh was sharp, rehearsed. "Please, I gave them relevance. I brought color, literally and metaphorically." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Even the camera operators hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in or pull back. Piers's expression hardened, though his voice stayed calm. "Let's talk about your relationship with the press. Many argue you seek publicity when it suits you, but reject it when it doesn't. How do you respond?" Meghan leaned forward, her smile tight. "I'd say people like you should learn the difference between privacy and secrecy. But then again, if you understood that, you wouldn't have built your career on pestering people." The jab landed like a blow. The audience flinched, some gasping audibly, others muttering under their breath. Piers didn't flinch. He smiled faintly, almost amused. "If that's how you feel, Meghan, then tonight will be fascinating." The temperature in the room shifted again. What had begun as an interview was now a duel, and the audience knew it. They weren't simply watching a conversation. They were witnessing a battle of wills. And though Meghan carried herself with smug confidence, Piers Morgan was not the type of man to yield ground easily. The red light on the camera glowed as the broadcast continued live, every word slicing through the airwaves into homes around the world. What started as polite introductions had already curdled into hostility, and the world was leaning closer to their screens, wondering just how far this confrontation would go. The studio air felt heavier when the cameras cut back from the first commercial break. Even the applause sounded muted, as if the audience was unsure whether they should cheer or brace for what was coming. Meghan Markle sat stiffly in her chair now, her black blazer framing a crisp white blouse that shimmered under the studio lights. Her legs crossed, arms relaxed, but her jaw was tighter than before. Piers Morgan, on the other hand, leaned forward with calculated ease, his notes spread neatly before him like weapons waiting to be deployed. "Welcome back," Piers said evenly, his voice carrying that familiar blend of charm and bite. "We're here with Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, or as she prefers these days, entrepreneur, advocate, and disruptor, perhaps." The audience chuckled nervously, their eyes darting between the host and his guest. Meghan smiled faintly, her lips curving, but her eyes sharp. "Disruptor?" she repeated, her tone laced with irony. "I prefer to think of myself as someone who refuses to play by outdated rules." "Outdated," Piers echoed, his eyebrow arching. "You mean the monarchy?" She tilted her head, clearly unfazed. "Call it what you want. I call it a relic, a gilded cage wrapped in centuries of illusion." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some clapped, a few even cheered, but the majority shifted in their seats, uncomfortably aware that these weren't sound bites. They were daggers. Piers pressed, his voice deceptively calm. "And yet, Meghan, you stepped into that cage willingly. No one forced you to marry into the royal family. Do you take any responsibility for underestimating what that life might be?" Her smile sharpened. "Ah, yes, the classic blame the woman approach. She should have known her place, right? How original, Piers." The audience stirred uneasily, murmurs scattering across the studio. Piers held her gaze unshaken. "This isn't about place, Meghan. It's about accountability. Do you believe you've made mistakes? Could you have handled things differently?" Her tone turned mocking. "My only mistake was thinking that family, that institution, or people like you could ever be decent." The silence that followed was thick, punctuated by an audible gasp from the front row. Piers, however, refused to let her words hang uncontested. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, which only amplified its weight. "So, no regrets? Not about the monarchy, not about the relationships fractured, not about the brotherhood between Harry and William that's been torn apart?" Meghan's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly masked it with a dry laugh. "Harry is happier than he's ever been. If that ruins your tabloid narrative, well, too bad." There it was again, that jab aimed not just at Piers but at the very foundation of his profession. The audience reacted with a mixture of gasps and uneasy chuckles. Piers straightened his posture, his pen tapping lightly against his notes as if considering his next strike. "Let's talk about Harry directly," he said, voice low but firm. "Many observers say he's changed, more isolated, angrier, even withdrawn. Do you feel responsible for that?" Her eyes narrowed, her voice turning syrupy sweet. "Oh, Piers, I'm sorry you're so obsessed with another man's marriage. Are you unhappy at home? Do you even have a wife?" The audience erupted. Gasps, nervous laughter, a collective intake of breath. The audacity of the remark shocked even the crew behind the cameras. Piers blinked once, then gave a tight, deliberate smile. "Happily married, thank you. But tonight we're talking about you, not me." "Of course we are," she said with a dismissive flick of her hand. "Because people like you need a villain to keep ratings alive. How quaint." That was when the temperature in the room truly shifted. The duel had sharpened into a knife fight, each word slicing into the silence that followed. Piers remained composed, his professional veneer unbroken, but the glint in his eyes betrayed a man who had reached his limit. "And yet," he countered coolly, "you walked into the studio knowing exactly what questions would come. Don't act surprised that people want answers." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "Answers? Or entertainment? Let's not pretend, Piers. This isn't journalism. This is spectacle." The audience's discomfort deepened. Some clapped, but more shifted uneasily. Meghan's veneer of charm was cracking, and her irritation was impossible to miss. Piers' voice dropped again, this time cutting through the tension like a blade. "Spectacle or not, Meghan, you've made it clear you don't care what the monarchy thinks. You don't care what the press thinks. Do you even care what the public thinks anymore?" She leaned back, arms folding, her expression defiant. "I care about what matters in public opinion. The rest, irrelevant." It was a chilling moment. The audience murmured, their loyalty uncertain, their judgment clouded by the spectacle they were witnessing. The cameras stayed locked on Meghan's face, capturing every flicker of defiance, every flash of disdain. Piers leaned forward, hands clasped, voice steady but unmistakably sharp. Then tonight, the public has seen it firsthand. Not my words, yours. The crowd erupted in uneasy applause, torn between admiration for Piers's restraint and disbelief at Meghan's brazenness. The tension in the studio was palpable, coiling tighter with every word. What had started as a civil interview was no longer journalism, it was war. The cameras blinked back to life after the final commercial break, but the atmosphere in the studio was anything but refreshed. The audience, once eager and lively, now sat tense and stiff, as though they had stumbled into a storm they weren't prepared to weather. The lights glared down, merciless and hot, highlighting the subtle cracks in Meghan Markle's polished composure. Across from her, Piers Morgan looked calm on the surface, but his jawline was rigid, his eyes sharp as knives. "Welcome back," Piers said, his voice low and deliberate. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and if you've been watching, you know this hasn't exactly been the conversation I expected to have tonight." The audience chuckled uneasily, some clapping out of habit, others folding their arms in anticipation. Meghan tilted her head, her smile more of a sneer now. "Oh, don't act surprised, Piers. You live for this. The gotcha moment, the clash, the spectacle. Isn't that why I'm here?" Piers's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't rise to the bait. "You're here," he said firmly, "because people want answers about your choices, your legacy, and the impact you've had on the royal family. But so far, you've spent most of this interview dismissing, deflecting, and insulting." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Meghan uncrossed her legs, leaned forward, and smirked. "Maybe because your questions aren't worth answering. Or maybe, Piers, it's because I refuse to play into your fantasy of me as the villain of Britain." The audience gasped audibly, some shaking their heads. A woman in the front row whispered, "She's pushing it too far," while others muttered nervously. Piers tapped his pen against the desk once, then set it down. His smile vanished. "This isn't about fantasy, Meghan. This is about accountability, and you've shown none." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Accountability? Please, I've been held accountable for things I never even did. Lies, gossip, smear campaigns. You should thank me, Piers. Without me, half of your headlines would dry up." The jab was brutal, and the audience reacted with gasps and scattered laughter. But Piers's face hardened. He leaned in, his voice quieter now, but more dangerous. "I've interviewed prime ministers, presidents, and actual royalty. People who disagreed with me, who challenged me, but who still managed to answer questions with some degree of dignity. You, Meghan, have mistaken this studio for your Instagram account, thinking you can control every word, every angle, every narrative. But this isn't your platform. This is my show." The silence was electric. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming tighter on Meghan's face as her smirk faltered for the first time. "Wow," she said finally, her voice dripping with disdain. The bitter old man finally shows his true colors. Small, predictable. Piers stood slowly, pushing his chair back. The audience froze, sensing history in the making. "No," he said calmly, though his voice carried steel. "What I've shown tonight is patience. Patience that has now run out." The audience inhaled sharply. Meghan blinked, clearly taken aback by the firmness in his tone. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "You heard me," Piers replied. "You came here with an opportunity to tell your side, to give people answers. Instead, you've chosen arrogance, deflection, and insult, and I will not waste another moment of my show indulging it. You can leave now." The words echoed across the studio like a thunderclap. For a moment, Meghan sat frozen, lips parted, her composure slipping like glass under pressure. Then, with a dry, mocking laugh, she unclipped her microphone and rose to her feet. "Well," she said, adjusting her blazer, "at least now the world has seen the real Piers Morgan, a man who can dish it out but can't take it." Without missing a beat, Piers shot back. "And now they've seen the real Meghan Markle. Arrogant, entitled, and worst of all, boring. The audience erupted, some gasping, others cheering, many applauding as if they had just witnessed a knockout punch. Meghan's lips tightened into a thin line. She spun on her heel, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor as she strode toward the exit. The cameras followed her, capturing every step until she disappeared behind the curtain. The slam of the studio door reverberated like a final curtain drop. Piers sat back down, adjusted his tie, and looked directly into the lens. His voice was calm again, almost casual. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think that just about sums it up. We'll be back after the break." The studio erupted into applause, louder this time, more decisive, as if the audience itself had chosen a side. The broadcast cut to black, but the clash would ripple far beyond that studio. Headlines would erupt, debates would ignite, and the world would ask the question, did Piers Morgan go too far, or was Meghan Markle the architect of her own undoing?